Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so we have been now discussing the functions of the chittas, the states of consciousness in the Abhidhamma. And if you remember, last time we went through the 14 functions of the chittas: rebirth linking, life continuum or bhavanga, adverting, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, receiving, investigating, determining, the javana stage, registration, and the death, dying. Okay, so now we come to the next section, which is determining what chittas perform what functions. This is very important for understanding. And I think when we go through this section, you'll see in the earlier classes, when we went through the names of all of these different chittas, it probably all seemed like conceptual chaos to you. Why are you laughing? You're supposed to be saying, no, it was perfectly clear. Yeah, so it seemed like a kind of, like an incomprehensible, indecipherable, unintelligible, intellectual chaos. Okay, by the time we go through this section, it's sort of like the pieces will start falling in place. This will be like the stage, you know when you have these jigsaw puzzles and you're trying to fit the pieces together, and at first it's just like a chaos of little bits and pieces of puzzle. Then you start fitting them together. Then at a certain point, you're still far from finishing the puzzle, but now I'm getting feedback. Now the contours of the puzzle, the picture is starting to come into place, fall into place. And that's what will happen, hopefully, with this section. But before we go into the actual text of this section, there's something important to be explained as a kind of a preface to this section, and that is here in the guide, where we say that the present section will be less likely to cause perplexity, confusion, if it is recognized that there is a distinction between a type of consciousness and the function after which it is commonly named. That is, certain types of consciousness are named after a single function that they perform. For example, we speak about especially the investigating consciousness and the mind or adverting consciousness. So we give specific names to those kinds, to those chittas, those kinds of consciousness. But this name is chosen as a convenient designation based on maybe the primary function of that citta or the more interesting function. And it does not mean that this type of citta, that this citta is restricted to a particular function. Several of the chittas, actually many of them, perform several functions. And those functions might be completely different from the function after which it is named. And I have an analogy from everyday life to illustrate this. We have, say, maybe a college professor, we'll name him Professor James Taylor. What's so funny? Is there a professor here named James Taylor?
He's a singer.
I see. Okay. Okay. Look, James Taylor can be a common name. I'm sure if we do search the internet for Professor James Taylor, we'll find a few. Okay. We call him Professor James. His name is James Taylor. We call him Professor Taylor. Everybody calls him Professor Taylor. Does his wife call him Professor Taylor?
Sometimes, maybe.
So she'll call him Jim. And do his kids call him Professor Taylor? They'll call him Daddy. And his friends might call him Jim. Or if he's introduced in an informal setting, he'll introduce himself as James. And so he'll be designated in different ways according to the situation where he is. And so in a similar way, or actually we could also say, maybe this is a better analogy, we have the Professor James Taylor, so he's named Professor Taylor because he's, by profession, a college professor. So that's the function after which he's named. But he has other things that he does. He's a husband. So when he's talking to his wife, he's not teaching classical Greek literature. And maybe his kids has asked him to be the coach on the town softball team. So when he's coaching the softball team, he's not being a professor of classical Greek literature. So he has different functions depending on his situation, even though on his Facebook page he's called Professor James Taylor. Okay, so this will help to clarify what might be a puzzle as we go through this section on the chittas and their functions. Okay, so there are... Now we come to the classification by way of consciousness. So amongst all of the chittas, 19 chittas perform the functions of rebirth linking, bhavanga or life continuum, and death. Okay, so what are the chittas that perform these functions? And this is where some of that confusion might have arisen. The two types of investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity. Yeah.
The bhavanga, the life continuing chitta.
Yeah.
Is that what other traditions, other cultures would call a self?
No. And also I want to say something about asking questions. If you have questions, please either retain them in your mind or make a note of them until I pause. I'm often pausing to ask for questions. But when I'm starting like a presentation, if one starts raising their hands to ask questions, then I get thrown off. And if I have to answer the question at length, then I don't really get a chance to cover the topic. I'll give everybody a chance when it's appropriate to ask the questions. Okay, so there are these two types of investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity. So this might raise the question, but those are supposed to be investigating chittas. What are they doing? Serving as rebirth linking, life continuum, death consciousness. If I'm investigating at the time of death, I'm not going to die. Okay, the reason is that investigation is just one of the functions performed by that kind of consciousness. But this kind of consciousness has several functions. And the formal name for this kind of consciousness is, if it's the wholesome, unwholesome resultant, the formal name is ahetuka akusala vipaka manovinyana dhatu, which would be a rootless, unwholesome resultant mind consciousness element. And the other one, its counterpart, will be the rootless, wholesome resultant mind consciousness element. So that's a pretty big name to handle. So instead of using that big name, for convenience, we refer to that kind of consciousness as the investigating consciousness. But investigating is only one of its functions. It has, I think it has 5 functions altogether, but we'll come to that shortly. This reminds me a little bit of names in Sri Lanka, names of lay people in Sri Lanka. Like, I remember a person that I knew, his name was Ekanayaka Nibanda Ulambana Rajagirya. And so we used to call him Upali. And those names I mentioned didn't include the last name. Okay, so this kind of consciousness that performs the function of investigation, that type of citta, also performs the functions of rebirth linking, life continuum, and death. Okay, now we come to the 8 great resultants. The 8 great resultants. Let us go back to that table. Okay, the 8 great resultants, those are the 8 sense sphere resultant cittas. So now we can see how a sense sphere resultant citta is functioning. 3 of its functions are to take on the role of activating the rebirth. So when the rebirth consciousness arises, for those in the sense sphere, at least some in the sense sphere, those who get a good rebirth in the sense sphere, it will be a sense sphere, beautiful resultant consciousness. A beautiful sense sphere resultant consciousness, one of those 8 great resultants. And then, for those beings who are reborn in the fine material sphere, those beings who attain the jhanas, and then they maintain the jhanas, and so they're reborn in the form realm or the fine material sphere. That's just the same thing, form realm, fine material sphere, just different English terms. So their rebirth consciousness, which also becomes then the bhavanga and the death consciousness, that will be one of the fine material sphere resultant cittas. And it will be the resultant citta that corresponds to the highest level of jhana that they attained and mastered. So say a meditator attains the first jhana, but doesn't go beyond that. So that meditator, and they're able to maintain that jhana up to the time of their death. So when they are reborn, they will be reborn with a fine material sphere, first jhana resultant citta. If the meditator attains, say, the fourth jhana out of the 5 jhana scheme, and they master the fourth jhana, then at the time of death, they'll be reborn with a fine material sphere resultant citta of the 4th jhanic level. And then we have the reason it says 9 here, because there's 5 from the fine material sphere and 4 from the immaterial sphere, or the formless realm, resultants. So if the meditator has gone beyond the jhanas and has achieved any of the 4 immaterial sphere meditative attainments, and then masters that attainment, then at the time of death, and when they come into their next existence, they'll be reborn with an immaterial sphere resultant citta that corresponds to that level of their meditative attainment. So say somebody has mastered the base of infinite space, and so they will be reborn with the immaterial sphere resultant citta of the base of infinite space. And that means that they will be reborn in that realm of existence, the realm of infinite space. And when they're reborn there, they're reborn with that resultant citta of the immaterial sphere, that base of infinite space resultant citta. Similarly, if they go further, they master the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Whatever level they master, then their rebirth consciousness will take place in that realm corresponding to their attainment, and they'll be reborn with the corresponding type of immaterial sphere resultant citta. And that citta functions at the moment of rebirth. It arises just for that split second. And then that citta, that same type of citta, will continue through the whole course of life as the bhavanga citta, that underlying sort of passive, quiet flow of the citta. So we, being human beings, we have what kind of citta, resultant citta, do we have? I mean, we don't know specifically, but where amongst in the scheme? Sense sphere, which? Yeah, hopefully resultant. I mean, a sense sphere resultant well, actually, we would all have wholesome resultants. Because we're human beings. Human beings are are reborn through wholesome karma. So it will be a beautiful sense sphere resultant, one of the 8 great resultants. Though there's one conscious being in this realm, in this room, who was not born with one of the sense sphere, beautiful sense sphere resultants. Sorry, fellow. We just have to be. I think if he's helping out, he's generating the wholesome karma now. So. Okay, so those 19 cittas, the 2 types of investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity, the 8 great resultants, the 5 fine material sphere, and the 4 immaterial sphere resultants. Those are the cittas that perform these three critical functions. And for us, like once we're born with a particular rebirth and bhavanga consciousness, that same citta for each one of us continues to flow whenever there's not active consciousness taking place. So we're constantly sort of dropping back into that same kind of citta that arose at the very moment of our rebirth. Okay, let's see if the commentary... Okay, so it's in the single life, it is the same type of citta that performs the three functions of rebirth, linking, bhavanga, and death. So at the moment of conception, this type of citta arises, linking the new existence to the old one. Throughout the course of life, it's the same citta that arises countless times as the flow of the bhavanga. And at death, it's the same citta, same type of citta, that occurs at that moment of passing away. Okay, this is the more detailed explanation. Okay, so about the 19 cittas that perform these three functions. Okay, the unwholesome resultant investigating consciousness performs these functions in the case of those beings who take rebirth into the what's called the woeful planes or the lower realms, the hells, the animal realm, the sphere of the pretas, the petas, and the asuras. So these beings, all of them, the rebirth linking bhavanga consciousness is a result of unwholesome karma. That's why they're reborn in that realm. And for some reason, it's this type of consciousness that performs the function of investigating that also performs those functions. Okay, the wholesome resultant investigating consciousness. Now remember, this is a citta without the roots. It doesn't have the beautiful roots. So it's the result of relatively weak wholesome karma. So we want to generate and create strong wholesome karma. But those who generate wholesome karma that is not especially strong will still obtain generally a human rebirth, but it will be a human rebirth with some kind of congenital disabilities. So it said that this performs the function of rebirth linking and bhavanga in a human rebirth as one who is congenitally blind, deaf, dumb, and so on, as well as among certain of the lower classes of the devas and spirits. Now this, I think it's referring to those who have these conditions congenitally. It doesn't mean that a condition like that could arise in the womb in the course of development, the fetal development. In that case, it doesn't mean that this kind of citta is present. And if it happens in the course of life, that one goes blind or loses the hearing, it's not because of that citta, but because of other conditions. But this is where we would say in modern terms that some damage has taken place maybe in the, it's called the gamete? I don't remember the term. Like the fertilized egg that then divides and subdivides to become the fetus. Okay, so in that case, this kind of disability is the result of unwholesome karma, but the human rebirth is the result of wholesome karma. But because it's a weak wholesome karma, so this disability has arisen. Okay, then the 8 great resultants, the beautiful sense sphere resultants that have 2 or 3 roots, these perform those functions for those reborn in the good sensuous realms as gods and human beings, free from congenital defects. And so we have 10 chittas that perform the functions of rebirth, bhavanga, and death in the sensual plane. Then the 5 fine material sphere resultants serve as the rebirth consciousness and so forth for those reborn in the fine material sphere of existence, and the 4 immaterial resultants perform those functions for those reborn into the respective immaterial planes of existence. So now we could see the relationship between karmically active chittas and the rebirth chittas, the resultant chittas. Okay, there are 2 chittas that perform the function of adverting. Okay, what are those 2 chittas that perform the function of adverting? Okay, one is called the 5 sense-door adverting consciousness. We've met this chitta already several times. So this is at the very beginning of a sense-door thought process. When some object knocks at one of the 5 sense doors, then there's that chitta that arises sort of asking itself, what door are they knocking at? So if it's a form at the eye, it'll turn to the eye. If it's a sound at the ear, it will turn to the ear, and so on. So this is such that one quick moment of citta that turns to one or another of the 5 sense doors. Then the other adverting consciousness is the mind door adverting consciousness. So this is the citta that turns to the mind door when some object, like a thought or some idea, some image, some concept, starts to arise at the mind door, not through the physical senses. And both of these chittas are rootless functional chittas, ahetuka kiriya. Okay, then there are 2 chittas that perform each of the functions of seeing. First seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. Those are the 5 kinds of bare sense consciousness, the one moment of immediate, taking in the immediate sensory impression, and then the receiving citta. So why are there 2 performing each of these functions? Resultants, right. Unwholesome resultant and wholesome resultant. So depending on the nature of the object, if it's a sort of a disagreeable object, unpleasant object, it'll be the unwholesome resultant arises. If it's an agreeable object, pleasurable object, a wholesome resultant arises. Okay, then 3 perform the function of investigating. You see, it's the same kind of citta. It's that ahetuka kiriya mano vijnana ahetuka a kosala vipaka or kosala vipaka mano vijnana dhatu. The same kind of citta. In one situation, it performs the 3 functions of rebirth linking, life continuum, death. That is, in the passive role, it performs those functions, but it could also take on the active role. In the active role, they'll perform the function of investigating. So those are 2. And then the third one, this is in the case of an especially delightful object, there arises that wholesome resultant investigating consciousness accompanied by joyful feeling. Okay, so we have 3 performing the function of investigation. Okay, now this is another example of one citta performing different functions. So here the text says, the mind or adverting consciousness performs the function of determining in the 5 sense doors. Now, if you remember the table on page 155, you could see in position number 8, after the investigating consciousness arises, there arises a citta that has the function of determining. That citta arises with the function of determining. Number 8. Okay, that citta that exercises the function of determining is the same type of citta that exercises the function of mind or adverting. So this is like, who's that guy coaching the Little League team? Professor James Taylor. But he's a professor in the university. How could he be coaching the Little League team? He has 2 functions. During the weekdays, he's professor at the university. On Saturday morning, he's the coach of the Little League team. So don't think because he's professor that he can't be Coach Taylor or Coach Jimmy. So here comes the explanation. That's the 5 sense door. Okay, the function of determining. So there's no distinct citta known as the determining consciousness, but it's the same type of citta, the one called the rootless functional consciousness, accompanied by equanimity, that performs the function of mind or adverting in the mind or process, and the function of determining in a process through the 5 physical sense doors. Okay, then, let's see, go back to the text. Okay, with the exception of the 2 types of adverting consciousness, that's a little confusing. Let's just say that there are 55 cittas that perform the function of javana. And remember, the function of javana, that is the function where we actually respond to the object that's appeared. This is the stage in the process in which it runs for 7, usually it runs for 7 instances, 7 moments of javana arise. And it's in this javana stage that one sort of actively responds to the object that has appeared either at the sense door or at the mind door. So this is the decisive stage in the process where one is creating new karma. So everything leading up to the javana is either a bare functional citta, a kriya citta, or a resultant citta. So we could say that this stage in the process represents the flow of old karma coming to maturity. The javana stage is the stage of creating new karma. So there's this constant sort of oscillation back and forth, old karma producing its results, then in the javana stage producing new karma that will have its consequences in the future, maybe long into the future. And so there are 55 types of 55 cittas that perform that function. So these are the unwholesome cittas. If you're keeping numbers, you could put 12. There are 12 unwholesome cittas. Then all of the wholesome cittas. There are 8 sense sphere wholesome, 5 fine material sphere wholesome, 4 immaterial sphere wholesome, and then the 4 supramundane paths, the 4 paths. And then this is the unusual case where the only resultant cittas that occur in the javana stage are the 4 fruits, the 4 supramundane fruits. Because when a person makes that breakthrough to the path, then the fruit arises immediately after the path in that same process. So it's not that the path creates karma that's going to produce its results in the next life or in lives after that, but right after the path arises, cutting off defilements, then the fruit arises as the result of the path. And that occurs in the javana stage. And then the functional cittas, these would be the beautiful cittas of the arahat, whether sense sphere, fine material sphere, or immaterial sphere. Those cittas arise in the javana stage. So maybe if we go back to that comprehensive chart of the cittas, okay, to see what arises in the javana stage. So we have the unwholesome cittas, these 12. We have the sense sphere wholesome cittas, the sense sphere functional cittas of the arhat, the fine material sphere wholesome cittas, the fine material sphere functional cittas of the arhat, the immaterial sphere wholesome cittas. That's for an ordinary person who achieves the immaterial meditative attainments. The immaterial sphere functional cittas, that's for arhats who attain the immaterial attainments. Then the 4 supramundane wholesome cittas, that's the 4 paths, and the 4 supramundane resultant cittas, the 4 fruits. So if you were to add them all up, you would find 54, I believe. So what is the 55th? What is the 55th? What? Good, very good. Say it out loud. Right, I was trying to give you a hint by smiling while I... It's that strange, rootless, functional, smiling citta of the arahat. Okay, then we have still the function of registration, and this will be a little puzzling. I don't think I could explain it at this point, but we'll just take it. Okay, the 8 great resultants, those are the sense sphere resultants, and the 3 types of investigating consciousness, that's a total of 11, perform the function of registration. So in this case, these 3 chittas that we call the investigating consciousness, they're not performing the function of investigation, but now they take on another job. Professor Taylor, we have another job for you, but I'm loaded. I have I'm teaching classes 5 days a week. I'm coaching the Little League team on Saturday. But at the monastery, we need somebody. We're having a big function on Sundays. We need somebody to help cook in the kitchen. Okay, so now Professor Taylor has another function. So it's like now the investigating chittas now have the function of registration. So we have 11 chittas performing the function of registration. And so we can get a kind of overview of these chittas and their functions from this very, very useful table. So with this table, you can go both ways. If you go down vertically like this, you take any function, let's say investigating, and you ask, what chittas perform the function of investigating? Then you see the investigating chitta with equanimity, the investigating chitta with joy, and there are 2 with equanimity, wholesome and unwholesome resultants, so we get 3. The total there is 3. If I want to know which chittas perform the function of registration, again, I go down along the row. I see investigating with equanimity, investigating with joy, and sense sphere resultants, which are 8. And so we see 11. Which chittas perform the function of investigation, of jhana? I see unwholesome. There are 12. I see the smiling chitta, 1, sense sphere wholesome, 8, sense sphere functional, 8, the sublime, that's the fine material and immaterial sphere, 9, and the supramundane, supramundane 8. And then I can take any chitta and ask what functions is that chitta performing. So let's take the investigating chitta with joy. What functions does that perform? So I go down this way. It performs the function of investigation and the function of registration. The smiling chitta, what is its function? I go down. Only one function, jhana. Sense sphere resultants, what are its functions? Here I see 3, rebirth, bhavanga, death, and go down, registration. So it has 4 functions. So if you really want to get a very comprehensive overview of the relationship between chittas and their functions, you can look at this table. Okay, now maybe I'll take questions. Please feel welcome to ask. Yes, Jerry? Yeah, take the microphone.
I realize it's not arbitrary, but how did they decide that it's the same cheetah, that professor, whatever his name is doing all those different functions? How do they know it's the same? Did they vote on it or sit around and...
Yeah. I have to say that we don't really know how the Abhidhamma came into existence. Probably it would have been a very early generation of monks. Let us say like conservatives will say, like the real Abhidhamma specialists will say that this has come down from the Buddha himself. I'm somewhat skeptical about ascribing the Abhidhamma as a system to the Buddha. So I would say probably from the early generation of monks, probably based a large extent maybe on their own meditative experience into seeing at very, very fine microscopic levels how these functions work.
And they saw or observed or noticed a similarity to account for the same state of consciousness doing different functions.
Probably so, yeah.
Right, but it's not intuitive, at least to me. Maybe
it's not intuitive at all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I have to say,
Thank you.
Yeah. I see a hand over.
Another question. I'm not unclear about when a cheetah arises and there are chaitasikas along with it. You talked about the box of chocolates.
Yeah.
And the box is the cheetah and the chaitasikas are the chocolates.
Yeah.
Does this all happen in the same moment?
Yes. All of these chaitas are, again to use that simile, they're boxes of chocolates in a sense, that each chaita includes a multitude of the chaitasikas, the mental factors with it.
So are they sort of unified in one kind of whole, homogeneous? They're not homogeneous because there's different fat parts, but somehow it seems like a whole in some way if you were able to observe it.
Yeah. Each chaita, if you remember when we were discussing the chaitasikas, together with the chaitasikas, a single arising, single cessation, single object, single sense base or sense organ that they're based on. And so the citta arises together with the chaitasikas. The citta, the citta taken in itself as a separate entity has the task of sort of illuminating the object, making possible the experience of the object. But within that citta, the individual chaitasikas each perform different tasks, like feeling, Vedana, experiences, we say the taste of the object, the flavor of the object, whether it's pleasant, painful, neutral. Perception is what homes in on the characteristic of the object, the features of the object. Chaitana, volition, originates some, volitional response to the object. And if it's a passive or resultant citta, then they say the chaitana coordinates the other mental factors in relating to the object. So they all have their own separate tasks to perform within this overall unity of the citta.
But it would seem like a simultaneous thing.
Yeah, the citta and the chaitasikas are simultaneous. But then when that citta falls away, the citta just arises for a microsecond and falls away, then another citta arises with if it's a different kind of citta, with a different constellation of mental factors. So every citta has its own group of mental factors.
Thank you.
On this side, any questions? I like to get people to ask questions and challenging questions. Okay, please.
I don't know if it's a challenging question, but
Make it challenging.
so the Bhavanga Chitta, does that also have Vedana attached to it?
Yeah, it has a Vedana, yeah. And it has its own object, which we will come to probably Friday. It has its object, it has its own feeling, its own perception, it has some kind of intention or volition. It has a lot of these mental factors. And what's interesting is that, as we'll see, the object of the Bhavanga remains the same throughout the whole course of life. So, throughout our course of life, we each have our own particular object, which was the object in the last conscious process of the previous existence, the object on which the death process focused becomes the object of the rebirth consciousness and of the Bhavanga. And so whenever we're not fully conscious, and even countless times, even right now, our mind is sort of constantly dropping in to the Bhavanga with that object that was the last object that we focused on in our previous existence. Yes, please.
Yes. I was wondering, are the 7 jhavanas stages, are they all the same citta, or do the citta differ between the 7?
In the jhavana stage, the 7 cittas are identical, the same type. I think the reason there are 7 jhavanas there is because it takes 7 cittas maybe to fully respond to the object. And then there are 7 jhavanas. This is in a sense door process, but it's somewhat different when it comes to the attainment of the jhanas and the formless meditations, which I hope we can get to. But it comes later in this manual. Okay? If you have another question, don't hesitate to ask.
So you may have already said that, so I apologize if you did, but I think you said, like for an arahat, that object, that last moment would be nirvana, right? Therefore, nibbana would be the object Bhavanga focused on, or the death consciousness?
No, for the arahat too, it will be the same object on which the mind focused at the moment of rebirth.
And that would be like anything? Or?
Yeah, we're going to, I don't want to get into that now,
Okay,
because that will come in doors. Now
Okay.
we're going to do doors, and after doors we come to objects.
Okay, thanks.
So, have to keep you in suspense about the objects. Okay. Yeah, please.
Just to clarify, so with his question,
Yeah, take the microphone.
I'm not going to pronounce it right. The jhavana,
Jhavana.
the jhavanas. So you said there's 7 cittas, but there's really one citta doing 7 different things.
It's one kind of citta occurring
keeps
7
rising
times.
and doing different functions.
No, it has the same. Its function is the jhavana.
Okay.
Jhavana is the function. So it's one type of citta occurs 7 times performing the function of jhavana.
And we call that 7 cittas.
Yeah, we call it 7 cittas, but it's in the jhavana stage. It's the same kind of citta.
Okay.
Though there are some exceptions to that. That would be with the attainment of the path, or the attainment of the jhanas, the attainment of the path and fruit. There's some difference, but we won't get into that now.
Thank you.
Okay, so let us move on to the next section or subsection. This is called the Compendium of Doors. So just to get familiar with the name of these, let's read them together in Pali. Let me just get this up here. Okay, so Dvara Sangahe, Dvarani Nama, Chaku Dvarang, Sota Dvarang, Gana Dvarang, Jiva Dvarang, Kaya Dvarang, Mano Dvaran, Chati, Chabidani, Bhavanti. Okay, so you could see actually, you see Pali, just like Sanskrit, is quite a distant cousin, but still a cousin of the English language. So the word here is Dvara. And does it remind you of any English word? What? Door, right. So these are called the 6 doors. And the 6 doors are referring to, first 5 seem pretty obvious: eye, ear, nose, tongue, and physical body. And then the 6th door is what is called the mind door. And then it continues by saying, the text continues, it says, here the eye itself is the eye door, and so for the ear door and the others. But the life continuum is called the mind door. And just to get a little technical, when the Abhidhamma speaks about what's meant by the eye, the ear, and so on, by the eye, it doesn't mean, technically speaking, this organ taken as a whole, but it's said that within this organ there is a certain kind of substance, which it's called chaku pasada, which means something like the sensitivity, eye sensitivity. That subtle substance has the function of taking in light and colors and forms. So all of the rest of the eye sort of functions as the support for that eye sensitivity. And it's the eye sensitivity that actually takes in the colors and forms. Similarly, the ear doesn't mean this. You know, if somebody, a mean guy, were to cut off this part here, I would still have the ear as the ear door. Of course, the ear means a kind of subtle substance inside the ear channel that is sensitive to sounds. And then if some mean king were to cut off this, I would still have the nose, because what's meant by the nose is some subtle substance, probably up here, that is sensitive to odors. Of course, the tongue would... I'd better not bring in that example. But it would correspond maybe to what's now called flavor buds, the nerves spread out over the tongue that respond to different flavors. And then the body would be like those nerves spread out over the physical body that are able to pick up tactile sensations. Okay, and then the mind door, what's meant by the mind door, is the bhavanga itself, is the mind door. Okay, then these 6 doors, why they're called doors, was a door, it's an opening in the wall through which people can come. People from the outside come in and people from the inside go out. And so we think of the door as being a portal, an opening through which the citta with its chaitasikas can go out to meet the object, sort of to shake hands with the object and say, "How are you, object?" Or alternatively, it can be like the opening through which the objects can enter into the mind and then become available for experience, available to the cittas and chaitasikas. So here in the explanation it says, the 6 doors of cognition are recognized, the 6 sense doors by which the citta and chaitasikas go out to meet the object, and by which objects enter into the range of the citta and chaitasikas. Okay, so I explained the sensitive matter. Here on page 130 we see the expression pasada rupa. And then the life continuum is called the mind door. So the life continuum is not physical. The other 5 sense doors are physical, but the life continuum, being the bhavanga, is mental. Okay, now we come to classification by way of the cittas. So now I'm on the top of page 131. In your book, is it the top of 131? Okay. Okay, so it says 46 types, let's use the word cittas, 46 cittas arise in the eye door according to circumstances. Okay, so, and maybe it's helpful if we look at that, I have to go back to that. 155. Okay, 46 types, 46 cittas arise in the eye door. So we could see from this diagram, the 5 door inverting. If a visible form is sort of strikes at the eye, then the 5 door inverting will turn through the eye, it will turn to that form. So there's the 5 door inverting. Then comes the I consciousness, the receiving, the investigating, the determining. Then, in the jhavana stage, it could only be sense sphere jhavanas. If one is in samadhi, the level of the jhanas, it won't be a visible form. And similarly, if one is in the arupa, the immaterial meditative attainments, you won't have a visible form as the object. So it will be sense sphere cittas in the jhavana stage, and then registration. And then the guide here will explain in more detail what those 46 types of cittas are. So we have the 5 door adverting is only of one kind, that simple functional citta. Then we have 2 kinds of I consciousness, either unwholesome resultant or wholesome resultant. Similarly, 2 kinds of receiving consciousness, unwholesome resultant, wholesome resultant. 3 kinds of investigating consciousness, 2 with equanimity, and then the joyful one. Then the determining citta, which is functional, so it's only one citta. then 29 sense sphere jhavanas. So those sense sphere jhavanas, 12 are unwholesome, the 12 unwholesome kind. We know 8 are rooted in greed, 2 in hatred, 2 in strong delusion. 8 are wholesome. 4 of these are disconnected from knowledge, 4 connected with knowledge. Then the corresponding 8 kinds of beautiful citta, beautiful functional citta. Those are the same as the 8 wholesome, but in the case of the arhat. And then there is the smile-producing citta for the arhats. So if you add them up, 12 plus 8 plus 8, 28, and then flash a smile and strike up one more, and you get 29. Okay, then those that perform the function of registration, so it gives only 8, because these are the sense sphere beautiful resultants, though there's actually 11 that perform the function of registration, but those types of cittas were already mentioned by mentioning the 3 investigating cittas. It's a little confusing, but the type of citta arises in 2 roles, so we don't have to count it twice. So when you add these up, 1, 2, 2, that's 5, plus 4, that's 9, plus 29, 38, and 8, that's 46. Okay, these same types of cittas arise in the other physical sense doors with their respective objects, except that in the case of the pair of the sense consciousness, if there's a sound striking on the ear, you're not going to react to it with eye consciousness, but there will arise ear consciousness, unwholesome resultant or wholesome resultant ear consciousness. And if somebody gives you a delicious dish of food, and before you taste it, or maybe you come into the kitchen and somebody is preparing something that's delicious, then there arises a smelling consciousness or nose consciousness. And then if you taste the food and it's really good, then it will be wholesome resultant tongue consciousness. If it's something like bitter gourd, of course people can like bitter gourd, but when you first taste it, it will probably be considered unwholesome resultant tongue consciousness. Okay, so in this way we have altogether, it said, it should be understood that altogether 54 types of sense sphere consciousness occur in the 5 sense doors. So we get the 54 by taking the 46 arise in the eye door. Then for the other 4 senses, each we have 2 kinds of sense consciousness, unwholesome resultant, wholesome resultant, so that makes 8. So 46 plus 8 makes 54. Okay, in the mind door, 67 types of consciousness arise. Okay, now in the mind door process, let's move on to the mind door chart. Okay, this is a bit tricky. Okay, in the mind door, 67 types of consciousness arise. mind door adverting, okay, that citta arises turning to the mind door. The mind door is the bhavanga. So this citta turns to the bhavanga. Then the 55 kinds of jhavanas that we came across in the section on functions, the jhavanas occur only through the mind door. Well, let's say, I'm sorry, I have to revise that and say the 55 jhavanas occur in the mind door, not only in the mind door. And then registration occurs in the mind door. Yeah, this maybe is an important point to understand. I was trying to find the passage where it's explained. Maybe I'll just go on. Okay, so we have 54 types of consciousness occur in the 5 doors, in the mind door. So all 55 types of jhavana occur in the mind door. So only 22 cittas do not occur in the mind door. The 5 door adverting, the 2 sets of 5-fold sense consciousness, the 2 types of receiving consciousness, because those are restricted to the sense door process, and the the 5 fine material resultants and the 4 immaterial resultants do not occur in the mind door, because those cittas take on the role of being the bhavanga, the rebirth and bhavanga. So they don't occur in active processes of consciousness. So they occur only as the passive flow of consciousness, only in the passive stage. Technically, they're called door-freed or process-free types of consciousness. So the 5 fine material resultants and the 4 immaterial resultants do not occur in the mind door. And so there are 19 cittas which are said to be door-freed because the functions of rebirth, bhavanga, and death do not occur in any of the sense doors. Okay, now we come to the classification by the number of doors. Ooh. I hope it wasn't damaged. Is it possible maybe to put it here? Would it would be safer there? Okay. Okay, so now classification by number of doors. Okay, of those that arise through doors, 36 cittas occur with one door. Okay, so what are these 36 cittas that occur through only one door? Okay, the 2 sets of 5-fold sense consciousness. Okay, so eye consciousness, ear, nose, tongue, body consciousness, those cittas only occur through their own respective door. And then the sublime means the fine material sphere and immaterial sphere, jhavanas, those occur only through the mind door. So when somebody attains, say, a jhana, one of the jhanas, it's not occurring through eye, ear, nose, tongue, or body, but only in the mind door. Similarly, those who achieve the 4 immaterial attainments, those jhavanas occur only in the mind door. And the supermundane, that is, the paths and fruits, they occur in the jhavana stage only through the mind door. Okay, then there's what is called the 3 mind elements. The 3 mind elements, this is a shorthand term for the 5-door adverting consciousness and the 2 types of receiving consciousness. So those 3 chittas occur only through 5 doors. So the 5-door adverting consciousness can occur through eye, ear, nose, tongue, body. It doesn't occur through the mind door. And then the 2 kinds of receiving chittas also occur through eye, ear, nose, tongue, body. They don't occur through the mind door. So those 3 occur through the 5 doors. Okay, then this gets tough for me also. So if you're finding this difficult, you don't have to explain it, I do. Okay. So now we have chittas that occur through 6 doors. So this will be the joyful investigating consciousness, the determining consciousness. First I'll read, then we'll go to the explanation. So the joyful, investigating, determining, and the sense sphere jhavanas arise through 6 doors. Okay, to get the explanation, we go to the guide. So the joyful investigating consciousness arises with the functions of investigating and registration in the 5 sense doors, but then it can also exercise the function of registration in a mind door process, a mind door sense sphere process. And we could see this on page 166. You could see in the case when there is a clear object, then we go from the mind door adverting to the 7 jhavanas, and then it's followed by 2 moments of registration. So that can occur in the mind door without dependence on the sense doors. And that function of registration can be performed by the joyful investigating citta. Okay, the determining citta. Okay, this citta performs the function of determining in the 5 sense doors and the function of adverting in the mind door. So you remember, when we discussed the functions, this citta, which is the rootless, functional, mind element consciousness, that's its official name. That citta, when it occurs in the 5 sense door process, it has the function of determining. If it occurs in a mind door process, it has the function of mind door adverting. And so the determining citta can therefore occur in the 6 doors, the 5 sense doors, as shown here, or the mind door when it's a mind door adverting citta. Then the great resultants, these 8 cittas, okay, like the 2 types of investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity, arise through the 6 doors in the role of registration, and as door-freed in the roles of rebirth, bhavanga, and death consciousness. So when these great resultants, if they are performing the function of registration in a sense door process, then they can arise through any of the 5 physical sense doors. And then in the mind door process, is shown on page 166, those 8 great resultants can take on the function of registration. So that will be in the mind door. And so they can occur in the 6 sense doors. And then when they take on the roles of rebirth, bhavanga, and death consciousness, then they are said to be door-freed. They're not occurring through any of the doors. Okay, then the sublime resultants, those are the 5 resultant fine material sphere cittas, and the 4 immaterial sphere cittas, the 5 fine material sphere resultant cittas, and the 4 immaterial sphere resultant cittas, those do not arise through any of the doors, because those cittas occur only in the role of rebirth, bhavanga, and death consciousness. So those are door-freed types of cittas. They're outside the scope of the doors. This is difficult. Okay, and then we have a table, a useful table showing the relationship between cittas and doors. This is the table on page 133. Okay, so if you want to ask what kinds of cittas occur through the eye door, so we have, you can see the 5-door adverting, eye consciousness, then receiving, investigating with equanimity, investigating with joy, the determining citta, the sense sphere jhavanas, the sense sphere resultants. The sense sphere resultants here will be the 8 beautiful resultants or great resultants. So 46. Similarly, for the ear door, nose door, tongue door, body door, in the mind door, we have the investigating with equanimity, those 2, unwholesome resultant, wholesome resultant, investigating with joy. Those will be occurring in the stage of registration. Then the mind door adverting consciousness, which is same as the determining, occurs in the mind door. So that's one kind of citta occurring through 6 doors. It occurs through 5 kinds of sense doors and the mind door is mind door adverting. So it has 6 doors. Then the sense sphere jhavanas can occur through all 6 doors. Then sublime, that's the fine material sphere and immaterial sphere. And the supramundane jhavanas, those occur only through one door, that is, the mind door. You could say only through the mind door. Then the sense sphere resultants will occur through 6 doors. They'll occur through the 5 physical doors when they're taking on the role of registration consciousness, and they'll be door-freed when they're taking on the role of rebirth, bhavanga, and death consciousness. So they occur through 6 doors. They occur through the 5 sense doors and the mind door in the role of registration, and door-freed in the role of rebirth, bhavanga, and death. And so those 8 citas occur through 6 doors. Is this somewhat clear? I'm serious, no. I told Venerable Chen Chuan before this program started, we're going to have to give them a 10-minute break in between the program. He said, nah, you can do it, they can take it, you can do it. I said, when I was giving this program in the monastery in Carmel, in Zhuangyan Monastery, some of the students told me that they felt that their head was exploding. Okay, so that takes care of doors. So any questions on the doors? Yeah, please, good. Please take. Oh, did you want to ask a question? But the woman who has the microphone now, were you starting to ask a question? Then ask your question. You have it. So you go first. You go after.
For the people who doesn't have let's say they're deaf or they're blind.
Yeah.
Do they have less citas?
Do they have
less citas?
They wouldn't. If a person is completely blind, then they wouldn't have the eye door processes. And if a person is really completely deaf, then they wouldn't have the ear door processes.
So they have less citas?
Yeah, they wouldn't have those citas. Yeah, they would actually have, the blind person would not have, I guess that they would just be lacking the 2 citas, the unwholesome resultant and wholesome resultant eye door, eye consciousnesses, and the deaf person, the unwholesome resultant and wholesome resultant ear consciousness. Okay, please.
Venerable teacher, it's true, today I feel closest to the head exploding sensation.
Yeah. With a wholesome citta or an unwholesome citta?
I'm having trouble with the life continuum, bhavanga, being called the mind door.
Being called the mind door?
Yes. I've been trying to figure it out while you were speaking.
Yeah.
And because on page 123, the bhavanga function is said to be one of preserving the continuity of the individual existence. And then it's said to be something like a deep, dreamless sleep. And also that it is it supervenes and continues until the next cognitive process arises. So I get the impression like it is during the non-cognitive aspect of your consciousness. Because on page 45, it says that the mind door process is a cognitive process.
Yeah, it is a
So
cognitive.
I'm trying to figure out, like, how is it a cognitive process? And then it's supposed to be when there's no cognitive process?
The mind door process is a cognitive process. The bhavanga is the mind door, but it's not a cognitive process.
Oh, and then what about on page 131? I've given up on the numbers, but it says here 19 types of consciousness are door-freed, occurring by way of rebirth, linking, life continuum, and death.
Yeah.
So it seems to me like, isn't it saying that life continuum is door-freed, and then it is a mind door? I'm having a bit of problem with that.
Okay, first I'll use an analogy, then, which might seem a little too clever, but then I'll give explanation. So the analogy will be, the door to this room is not part of the inside of the room. The door is the entrance to the room. But if you say, what is in the room? You look around, you see tables, chairs, peoples, pillars, recording equipment. But you don't say the door is in the room, but the door is the entrance to the room. Okay, so that's an analogy. Maybe we'll say, let us not consider the door as the door panel, but the door is just, what are these things called? There's a word for those. The frame. Okay, the door frame. So the frame is continuous, say, with the hallway. So we'll say that the hallway is the flow of the bhavanga. The door frame, maybe it's almost like it's part of the hallway. It's like the end of the hallway. And then you pass through the door frame, and then you're into the room. So the door frame is actually the last part of the hallway before you get into the room. So the bhavanga is considered the mind door in that sense, because it's from the bhavanga that the mental contents come up that are not coming in through the physical senses. So it's through the bhavanga that comes up ideas, images, maybe non-sensory thoughts, and so on. So those are considered like coming up from the bhavanga. So the bhavanga is the mind door through which objects, purely mental objects, come up for the process of cognition.
So is that a separate function?
Okay. Now, wait, let me just continue. Now, we say that the bhavanga serves as the passive underlying flow of the chittas. And I said that we could see this function of the citta, of the bhavanga, most clearly in the case of a deep sleep. But as I said the other day, even during the course of our waking life, even while we're sitting here right now, the mind is constantly going back into the bhavanga, coming out, going back, coming out, very, very quickly. And so even when we're thinking, say we're thinking, you're listening, I have to think when I'm speaking, you are thinking when you hear me speaking. Those thoughts are coming out from the bhavanga, and then the mind, as those thought comes up, the mind is turning to the bhavanga very quickly, and then running through those thoughts in the javana stage. But this is all happening just so quickly that we don't detect the process taking place. We're not able to detect this drop into the bhavanga, coming out, dropping down, coming out, and the different stages in the processing of the information to get a clear thought. Does that make it a bit clearer?
Sort of. I think I have to think about that.
Okay, yeah. So because these mental objects, purely mental objects, they're not coming in through the senses, not coming through, forms, sounds, odors, tastes, tactile objects, but they're coming through the mind. They're coming into the mind. So the entryway through which they're coming is said to be the mind door, and then trying to find the mind door, the formulators of the Abhidhamma say that it is the Bhavanga. So the Bhavanga plays that role analogous to that of the physical senses. But the Bhavanga itself is not physical. It is that stream or process of chittas flowing by. Yeah, I thought somebody here has... Okay, good.
So I've been thinking, when you sleep and you dream, and that creates chittas, right? When you dreams, and those chittas, are they the same as when you are awake? Are they wholesome, unwholesome? Are they?
Yeah, that's a good question. First, in dreaming, there are definitely active chittas there. The dream is not the Bhavanga stage, but the dream will be active forms of chittas. And they would be, I would say that they would be mind or chittas, not sense chittas, when one is actually dreaming. It could be that it seems that you're dreaming, maybe there are sounds of birds chirping outside, or just for a moment you open the eyes and you take up some form in the room, and that happens so quickly that you don't really know you're seeing or hearing. And then that feeds into the dream. So you continue the dream based on the birds singing, and so you're dreaming about birds or something you see in the room. So that what's taking place in the dream are chittas, and whether they're wholesome or unwholesome, again I have to say that I don't think the Abhidhamma is really capable of explaining everything adequately explaining everything in our psychological life. Maybe certain things that happen in dreams will certainly be evidence of unwholesome or wholesome chittas. Like if one dreams, heaven forbid, but one is robbing part of a team that's robbing a bank. Yeah, so maybe those would be, but they would be, because it's in a dream, very, very weak if they're unwholesome chittas. Yeah, because you're not actually robbing the bank. And when you wake up, you have no thought at all of robbing a bank. It's just something that happens in the dream.
So that means it's better to have beautiful and nice dreams than it is to have bad dreams.
Yeah, well, to dream of doing beautiful things rather than... Yeah. Okay, on this side, yeah.
Thank you, Venerable. I just have a clarification I would ask you to make about the mind door adverting consciousness. It appears in the functional rootless citta, which is only the domain of arahants. Is that correct?
Wait, say again.
That mind door adverting citta appears in the functional rootless citta group, right?
Yeah.
So my question is since the functional rootless citta is only the domain of arahants.
No.
Okay.
No.
Not true. Okay.
No.
That's what I wanted to clarify.
No. The only rootless functional citta
of an arahant is
the exclusive domain of the arhats is
the smile.
The smiling consciousness.
I didn't mean it was the only domain of the arahants. I meant it was only the arahants fit into that domain as opposed to other types of people.
that fit into the domain of
functional rootless citta.
No.
So
there are 3 rootless functional cittas.
Right.
5 sense door adverting. Everybody has that.
Right.
Okay.
But
the mind door adverting citta, which is also the determining citta. Everybody has that.
But only with the sense gate, with the 5 physical sense gates, or also with the mind?
The rootless functional citta has 2 functions. If it occurs in the through the physical senses, through the physical sense doors,
right,
it performs the function of determining.
Right.
If it occurs in the mind door, it performs the function of mind door adverting.
And anyone can access
and
that.
Everybody has that.
Okay.
Yeah. So of the rootless functionals, only the third, that's smiling consciousness.
That's the only one that's limited.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Lauren.
I'm not sure if you want to take this up, but we were talking about the 6 sense doors and how that they're the means by which the chittas and chaitasikas go out to meet the object, and also the object comes in to meet the chittas and chaitasikas.
Yeah.
So can we fit the asavas within kind of the realm of these chittas and chaitasikas at this place?
Okay,
because they're kind of this flowing, and it's got this channel, and they're all at the sense door. So I'm wondering how that I can relate these.
Yeah, the asavas are, maybe I have to sort of translate and explain a little bit. Okay, so because maybe some people don't know the asavas. Maybe those who have studied Buddhism in English maybe know them as outflows, or sometimes inflows, or other words, taints, influxes, different renderings are used. So these are defilements, usually 3 or 4 defilements. The craving for sensual pleasures, craving for renewed existence, views, and ignorance. So those are defilements which are later in this manual, we'll relate them to the chaitasikas. So the first 2, craving for sense pleasures, craving for renewed existence, are forms of the chaitasika greed. Yeah, the asava, asava of views is the chaitasika of wrong view, and the asava of ignorance is the chaitasika of delusion. So maybe they're called asavas to indicate the way in which they might be seen as sort of buried someplace, sort of deep within the stream of consciousness, and then they sort of flow up to the surface. So it's a metaphorical term. Okay, maybe we can move. Okay.
Sorry, one more question. We were talking about the doors. Is there any overlapping the doors, say the 6 doors and the 6 root, 6 faculties or 6 roots that we talk about in different contexts?
Yeah, actually sometimes the word faculties are used. Pretty much it's the same as the doors, yeah. This would be the 6 sense faculties. Yeah, actually pretty much they're used as synonymous terms.
So the doors are the roots as well, or
faculties? Yeah, except that there's a technical distinction. But this is a rather subtle point of Abhidhamma. The 5 sense faculties and the 5 sense doors are identical. But it's said that the mind faculty includes all states of mind, all cittas. Yeah. Whereas the mind door is the citta that's functioning as the bhavanga, or is the bhavanga. But let's not get troubled by that now. It's a rather...
And also when you were talking about the
yeah, let's say for practical purposes we could say that they're the same.
Okay, but the six, but the mind door and the mind faculty are actually different.
Let's say the mind faculty will include the mind door, but it has a wider range. Okay. Since it includes it's said to include all types of chittas.
Okay, and also when you were describing the process of, for example, our daily mind movement, we're going back to the mind is going back to the Bhavanga and coming back. And is there any say overlapping process with the formation skandha? Like how consciousness, how different thoughts come from, like how it's formed. Is there any?
What's called the skandha of the formations or mental formations, that would include the chaitasikas. Yeah, so the chaitasikas are present in the different chittas. Yeah. So it's not that the mental formations are one thing and then the chitta is something completely different, but the mental formations are the chaitasikas within the chitta.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, let us see if we could start on the objects. The objects is an interesting but somewhat difficult topic. It starts off seeming to be easy, but then it gets difficult. Okay, so now we come to the analysis of the objects. So we could just read the names of the 6 objects together in Pali. Skipping over the first words, we start with Rupa Ramanang, if you see it. Sada Ramanang. Gandha Ramanang. Rasa Ramanang. Potaba Ramanang. Dhamma Ramanang. Okay, so those are the 6 objects, 6 kinds of objects. So those are, if we look at the translation, so the 6 are visible form object, sound object, smell object, or in other words, odor, taste object, which is the taste or flavor, tangible object, and then the mental object. Okay, so visible form itself is the visible form object, sound is the sound object, and so on. Okay, this is where it gets sort of a bit difficult. The mental object is 6-fold. There's something, and I'm going to explain these terms as we go on. Sensitive matter, subtle matter, consciousness or citta, mental factors, chaitasikas, nibbana, and concepts. Okay, then we can go to the guide, see what needs explanation here. Okay, so this is obvious that every citta has, together with the associated chaitasikas, has an object. That is because what it means to be citta is to be experiencing some object. Even, as we'll see, the bhavanga, that passive flow of chittas, has some object. Okay, so the object is that, we don't need that. Okay, the 6 kinds of objects. So the first 5 are all included in the category of rupa, materiality. So they belong to the first aggregate, the first of the 5 aggregates. So there's visible form, sound, smell, and taste. Those 4 are considered to be kinds of derived matter. That is, they are derived from the 4 great elements. They're not primary but secondary kinds of matter. And then the tangible object, the object of the sense of touch, is identified with 3 of the 4 primary elements themselves. The earth element, which is experienced as hardness or solidity, even softness. If you feel something and it's soft rather than hard, it's still a manifestation of the earth element. Then the fire element, which is experienced as heat, and if you feel something and it feels cool, that's still a manifestation of the fire element. It's just that the fire element of the object you're touching is less than the fire element of the body. And then the air element, which is experienced as pressure, or as expansion, or as movement, as motion. It's said that the 4th primary element, the water element, has the characteristic of cohesion, of binding things together. And so therefore, according to the Abhidhamma teachers, we don't experience the water element as an object of touch, but we can only sort of know it through the mind door, sort of as a mental object. This is what the Abhidhamma says, but I have to tell you my own experience. This was one day when I was in Sri Lanka. It's a warm climate there. And so we have outdoor clothesline. And so after bathing, I hang my towel up to dry. I went back into the cottage. Then after some time, I thought, let me see if the towel is dried yet. I come out and I felt the towel. Then I thought to myself, it's still wet. Then my mind went through a paradigm shift. Hey, wait a minute. According to the Abhidhamma, I'm not supposed to be feeling wetness. And then because the sun was strong, I thought, I know that those conservative Abhidhammikas are going to tell me that the water element, that what you're actually feeling is coolness together with softness. But because the sun was strong, so the moisture of the towel was warm, so it ain't coolness. Now, I didn't particularly notice because it was just the moisture of the towel, so I didn't feel any softness. It was like those little bumps of the towel. It was a bit hard. So I realized that I have to go back centuries in a time machine and argue with the formulators of the Abhidhamma that we can experience the sense, the water element as a sense of, through the sense of touch. Okay, but anyway, this is a point where I have to say I disagree with the Pali Abhidhamma here. I think, if I remember, I looked into the Theravada Abhidhamma, and they say that the object of touch can be all 4 elements. So on that point, I have to agree with the Theravada Abhidhamma. Okay, then the mental object. Let us try to cover this before we end the class. So the mental object is 6-fold. Okay, so each of the 5 physical sense objects, forms, sounds, odors, tastes, tactile sensations, can be experienced first through its own respective sense door process, and then through a mind door process. This might be a little puzzling based on what we've said so far, but let's take the example of this cup. Okay, I'm looking at this cup. Now, the sense door process, its job is to take in the green impression. So the sense door process that's occurring through the eye door is just taking in the green form and sort of processing it as a green form. But that which recognizes it as green and then identifies it as green will be a mind door process that has the green color as its object. And then to give another example, I'm not a very good singer, but I'll try. Da 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 da. What is that? I did it! What was it? Beethoven's what? What? Good, good. Okay, so what's taking in the sounds, just the sounds, each sound is the simple ear door process, but what is weaving the sounds together into a melody, even if you don't know Beethoven's Ninth, but you get the sounds, successive sounds. It's not like da, 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 da. There you just get individual sounds. But when I go da, 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 then you get a melody. So what's bringing them in together into a melody, according to the precepts, I'm not supposed to sing. Okay, that's one exception. But what weaves them into a melody, like I saw Heng Shuo, the president of this association, playing the guitar. Okay, what weaves the sounds into a melody, it's a mind door process. And then somebody gives you a cup of tea, and then you drink the tea. So it would be the tongue door process that just takes in the taste of the tea. But then what identifies, this is Ceylon tea, this is Darjeeling tea, this is oolong tea. So that would be mind door process that has the taste as its object. So each sense door each sense object can also be processed through the mind door. And then the 5 sense objects can also be processed by the process-freed chittas in the roles of rebirth, linking, bhavanga, and death. We will come Friday to how that takes place. Then mental objects, purely mental objects, can't be cognized at all through a sense door process. Let's take a purely mental object. The square root of 9. Can you process the square root of 9? You're not processing it in that way. He's holding up 3 fingers like this. But what you're taking in are like 3 fingers, but what's knowing them is the number 3. Even that would be a mind door process. Okay, so purely mental objects can't, and we're going to see what they are, can't be cognized through the physical senses, but only through a mind door process. Okay, then the 6 kinds of objects that are purely mental objects. And some of these are a bit strange, I admit it. One is sensitive matter. That is the subtle, or the sensitive matter of the sense organs. That's the eye sensitivity, ear sensitivity, nose, tongue, and body sensitivity. So we don't see those, hear them, taste them, touch them, but we know them through the mind door. Then there are certain kinds of subtle matter that can't be known through the senses. We don't have to take them up now. Then the citta can be an object of a mind or process. We can know our own citta. So it's said that we can't know, the citta that knows can't, it's expressed better. A citta cannot take itself in its immediacy as its own object, but a citta can experience or know an earlier citta. So if I get angry now, then immediately I can recognize I got angry. So a split second later, I realize I got angry. So I recognize I had an angry citta. Or if I was getting drowsy, then I recognize that, I had a drowsy citta. So I can know the cittas, and one can know the mental factors. One can focus, there's greed in my mind, there's anger in my mind, there's joy in my mind. So I can know the different chaitasikas. Then for the paths and the fruits, then nibbana becomes the object of the supramundane cittas, the paths and the fruits. And then what are called concepts, which includes all kinds of ideas, thoughts, judgments, and so on. Those can become mental objects. Okay, so now those take us into the 6 types of objects, and we'll have to continue with this next in the next class. Okay, I won't ask for questions now because we've just really introduced the topic of objects. Unless there's a quick question maybe about the mental object. Okay, so we'll end the class then with the sharing of the merits. Did everybody get the... Okay, so we're going to share the merits with the deities, the nagas or dragon spirits, the bhutas, the fair spirits, and all beings. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe sata anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagopadaya avici hetato tantare satakai upapana rupya rupicha asanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbutting.